Halo semuanya, selamat datang di channel saya. Di sini kita akan membahas tuntas dunia bisnis dan strategi sukses. Jadi, pastikan Anda subscribe. Selanjutnya, silahkan menyimak materi dari rekan saya berikut ini.
Welcome to today's Explainer, where we are literally decoding the fine print of your property tax obligations. I'll be your financial concierge as we navigate Indonesia's Law Number 1 of 2022. Specifically, we're tearing down the Rural and Urban Land and Building Tax, or as you probably know it, PBBP2. Look, if you own, use, or even just benefit from real estate in Indonesia, this is the absolute blueprint that dictates exactly what you owe the local government.
Here's a quick look at our agenda. First, who pays? 2, what exactly is taxed? 3, the exemptions. 4, calculating the tax base. 5, the rates and the master formula. And finally, 6, those crucial deadlines.
All right, part 1. Who actually pays this tax? Let's figure out the taxpayer identity. So, let's start right at the top of the funnel. You might naturally wonder, when you're looking at a piece of prime real estate, who's actually on the hook for the tax bill? Is it strictly the person whose name is physically stamped on that title deed? Or, does the government cast a much wider net?
Well, the crucial point here is that Article 39 defines the taxpayer in an incredibly comprehensive way. It includes any individual or entity holding formal rights to the land or buildings, sure, but it also includes anyone who physically controls or directly benefits from that property. So this means, even if you don't hold the deed, but you're the one commercially benefiting from a building, the local government absolutely considers you a valid tax subject. Essentially, both the formal owners and the functional beneficiaries are liable.
Moving right along to part 2. What is taxed? Let's look at the targeted properties.
The government's definition is frankly huge. According to Article 38, tax objects include the earth and buildings you own or control. But what's truly fascinating is that the law explicitly ropes in newly reclaimed land or artificially filled areas. So if you've gone out and created a brand new surface area on the water, hey, congratulations on the engineering marvel. But, you guessed it, it is now officially a taxable object under PBBP2. However, it's not just a blanket catch-all. The law intentionally excludes some massive land uses. If your land is used for plantation businesses, forestry, or mining, it's completely excluded from this specific tax. And why is that? Because those resource-heavy sectors are governed by entirely different fiscal frameworks at the central government level.
Let's dive into part 3, exemptions. How do you escape the tax net?
Knowing what gets taxed is obviously vital, but this begs a pretty interesting question. Are certain high-value assets completely shielded from this tax for the public good? Like, if a property serves a greater societal purpose, does the government just give it a free pass?
The answer is a resounding yes. The law carves out strict, absolute exemptions to make sure public good properties aren't burdened. We're talking about government offices, plus your nonprofit, social, religious, and educational facilities. It also shields graveyards, ancient historical ruins, protected national parks, and even diplomatic missions, as long as there's a reciprocal agreement with that foreign nation. Since these spaces serve the community or the state, they drop right off the tax ledger.
Okay, part 4, the tax base. Let's talk about calculating value.
Transitioning over to the financial math, Article 40 anchors this entire calculation to a metric called the NJOP, or the tax object sale value. Just think of this as the government's official assessment of what your property is worth based on the average price from fair market rate sales in your area. This single number is the foundational base for literally everything that follows.
But here's what's really interesting: the built-in legal buffer. You don't pay tax on the very first rupiah. The law guarantees a minimum non-taxable threshold of at least 10 million rupiah, which gets deducted straight from your NJOP. But a quick word of warning here. This generous buffer is restricted to only one property per taxpayer in a given region. So if you happen to own 5 villas in the exact same regency, only one of them gets that 10 million rupiah discount.
Let's move to part 5, rates and the formula. Time to piece this all together. Surprisingly, you aren't actually taxed on the entire remaining value of your property. Article 40 mandates a calculation basis that ranges from 20% up to 100% of your adjusted NJOP. The exact percentage is determined by your local government's regulations. So if your local government sets the basis at, say, 20%, your taxable pie just got significantly smaller before the rate is even applied.
Once you've got that sliced-down calculation basis, Article 41 steps in to protect you from runaway local taxes. It strictly caps the maximum local tax rate at 0.5%.
Local governments can absolutely charge less than that, but this legal ceiling ensures your overall liability never spirals out of control.
There's also a pretty fascinating caveat tucked into the law. If your land is dedicated to food production or livestock, the law guarantees you a lower tax rate compared to luxury residential or commercial plots. It's a very deliberate policy choice to protect domestic food security by just keeping overhead costs low for farmers. So, pulling all of this together, here is your step-by-step master formula. First, take your total NGOP assessment. Second, subtract your non-taxable threshold, which is that minimum 10 million rupiah we talked about. Third, multiply that remaining number by the local calculation basis. Again, somewhere between 20 and 100%. And finally, multiply that result by your local tariff, capped at a max of 0.5%. And boom, there you have it, your exact PBBP2 tax burden. Administratively speaking, you report your property details using an SPOP form, and then the government officially delivers your final bill via a notification letter known as the SPPT. Finally, Part 6, establishing the timeline and those crucial deadlines.
Under Article 43, the property tax technically covers a full calendar year, but the ultimate truth of your liability is determined on a single, specific day, January 1st. This is the accrual date. The exact physical and legal state of your property on this date acts as a snapshot. Whether you demolish a building on January 2nd or build a massive mansion on January 3rd, your tax bill for that entire year is locked in based on how the property stood when the sun rose on New Year's Day. And you have to be precise here, because the government absolutely retains the right to conduct inspections. Misreporting can trigger strict administrative or even criminal sanctions. Though keep in mind, as a taxpayer you do have rights. You can file for reductions, lodge objections, or officially appeal if you believe the assessment is wrong.
This leaves us with a somewhat provocative thought to end today's explainer. Knowing just how strictly this law relies on a single day's assessment, are your real estate assets strategically organized before the clock strikes midnight on January 1st? Remember, proactive planning is always going to be your best defense. Thanks so much for joining me to decode this blueprint, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.